The Mark of Cain has been a subject of mystery, debate, and speculation for centuries. According to the biblical account in Genesis, after Cain murdered his brother Abel, God placed a mark upon him so as to ensure that no one would take vengeance on him. The exact nature of this mark is unknown, but it is generally assumed to have been visible. The Hebrew word for mark, alf, is often translated as sign or token, yet it does not specify what form the mark took. Some interpretations suggest it could have been a letter from the Hebrew or Sumerian alphabet, placed on Cain's face or arm. The Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, also renders it as a sign, leading some to believe it served as a warning to others not to commit the same offense, or to steer well clear of the bearer, who was evidently dangerous. Over time, various theories have emerged, proposing that the mark could have been a scar, a tattoo, or another physical identifier. Regardless of its appearance, the biblical text emphasizes its function rather than its form. In today's episode, we'll explore the different theological interpretations of the Mark of Cain, examining how different traditions and scholars have envisioned its possible appearance and meaning, as well as acknowledging the more atrocious appropriations of the mark that allowed for some of the more heinous crimes in recent history. The Mark of Cain is deeply tied to the consequences of his crime. According to Genesis 4:11 through 16, after Cain murdered his brother Abel and attempted to conceal the fact from God, he was cursed as punishment. The curse had two distinct elements. First, the ground itself became cursed due to Abel's blood being spilled upon it, symbolically described as the earth drinking his blood. As a result, Cain would no longer be able to farm successfully. The land would refuse to yield produce for him. This may explain why, rather than continuing as a farmer, Cain later established cities, including the city of Enoch. The second part of the curse condemned Cain to a life of wandering. The Hebrew text describes him as a fugitive and a wanderer, a phrase unique within the Hebrew Bible. Some interpretations suggest that this meant Cain was forced into a nomadic existence, living apart from his family and unable to settle permanently. The Septuagint translation intensifies the description of Cain's punishment, adding that he would exist in a state of groaning and shaking upon the earth, implying that his exile was not only physical, but also one that caused him great distress. Syriac Christian traditions interpret this to mean that Cain suffered from a visible affliction, perhaps a trembling or physical mark that made him easily recognizable to others. Philo, a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher, viewed this curse allegorically, suggesting that it symbolized Cain's fear of being spiritually empty or soulless. It is in response to this curse that Cain receives the mysterious mark from God. Although the nature of the mark remains uncertain, its purpose is clear. It served as a divine assurance that Cain would not be killed in vengeance, despite his crime. The mark, therefore, was not an extension of the curse, but rather a form of protection, ensuring that Cain's punishment would be exile and suffering, not death at the hands of others. It may have also been established as a warning to others, reminding all those who he came across that he was a murderer, the first murderer, an unhinged man, and not one who could be trusted. Such a symbol would serve to identify him as an outcast and subsequently cause him to be shunned. Cain would endure the wandering of the earth, but to make it worse, he would do so on his lonesome, always recognized and rejected because of his marking. However, seeing as he did find himself a wife and did manage to build cities, it's arguable that not everyone was deterred by such a symbol, and perhaps even relished in his crimes. Nonetheless, despite understanding the curse and what it meant for Cain, the Bible never tells us what this mark looked like, and how it affected Cain in his life after he was banished. According to 11th century Rabbi Rashi, who is renowned for his commentaries on the Talmud and the Hebrew Bible, it was believed, according to his commentary on chapter 4 of Genesis, that the Mark of Cain was a single Hebrew letter of the Tetragrammaton, one of the 4 letters of the name of God. This theory suggested that God had engraved one of the holy letters of his own name onto Cain's forehead, making it pretty hard for anyone to miss. A similar account exists within the Zohar, where the Mark of Cain is believed to have been one of the 22 Hebrew letters of the Torah, though it's unclear which of these 22 letters fit the bill. Other Jewish traditions reveal that the mark wasn't as conspicuous as a mere letter, but was in fact an actual physical deformity. According to 1st or 2nd century rabbinic sage, Abba Jose ben Hanan, God had caused a horn to grow out of Cain's head, making him not only unsightly, but abnormal enough to be recognized on sight and at a distance. Such a physical description might even reconcile the account found in the Book of Jasher, or the Book of Jubilees, where Cain is mistaken for a wild animal in the field, and mistakenly filled with arrows by his descendant Lamech. In another Jewish interpretation that proves to be quite the departure from a bodily mark, 3rd century Jewish scholar Rav tells us that the mark was actually a dog that was bound by God to follow Cain around, reminding everyone who came across him of what he had done. One particularly troubling interpretation of the Mark of Cain is its association with race, specifically the idea that Cain's mark was dark skin. There is nothing in the biblical text to suggest that the mark had anything to do with skin colour, yet from the 18th to the 20th century, some groups pushed the belief that Cain was cursed with blackness, and by extension, that black people were under a divine curse as well. This idea was often linked with the separate but equally unfounded claim that Noah's son Ham was cursed with dark skin, and that his descendants were doomed to servitude, based on Genesis 9:20 through 25. These interpretations were used to justify slavery, and later, segregation and racial discrimination within religious institutions. In the United States, this distorted reading of scripture played a role in divisions among Christian denominations. The split between the Northern and Southern Baptist organizations, for example, were driven in part by differences over slavery and the education of enslaved people. The Southern Baptist group at the time of the split used the so-called Mark of Cain as a justification for slavery. Some Baptist ministers in the 19th and 20th centuries even preached that there were separate heavens, one for black people and another for white people, further entrenching racial divisions under the guise of theology. Mormonism emerged during a time when some religious groups in North America accepted the so-called Curse of Cain and Curse of Ham doctrines, using them to justify racial discrimination. Like many others in the 19th century, early Mormons commonly believed that black Africans bore Cain's mark in the form of dark skin, and that they were also subject to Ham's curse, which was interpreted as a divine decree of servitude. Brigham Young, the second president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, openly taught that black people were the cursed descendants of Cain. The Pearl of Great Price, a text considered scripture by most Mormons, contains a passage in which the prophet Enoch describes the descendants of Cain as having black skin and being shunned by others. And Enoch also beheld the residue of the people, which were the sons of Adam, and they were a mixture of all the seed of Adam, save it was the seed of Cain, for the seed of Cain were black, and had no place among them. Brigham Young reinforced this idea, stating that the Mark of Cain could be seen on the countenance of every African. After the death of Joseph Smith, Young expanded these racial teachings further. In 1852, he declared that people of black African descent were not eligible to hold the LDS priesthood, a restriction that remained in place for over a century. He also taught that in the premortal existence, both Cain and Abel were leaders in the heavenly war. According to this belief, black people had fought under Cain and were subsequently cursed alongside him, while those who followed Abel were blessed. Young claimed that Cain's descendants would not receive the priesthood until all of Abel's descendants had first been granted it, a belief that framed racial exclusion as part of a divine plan. The LDS Church has since distanced itself from these past teachings. In an official statement, the Church declared that it disavows the theories advanced in the past that black skin is a sign of divine disfavor or curse, and unequivocally condemns all racism, past and present, in any form. While the biblical text remains ambiguous about the mark's physical form, its significance has always been clear. It was a sign of divine protection, ensuring that Cain would not be killed despite his crime. Interpretations have varied widely, ranging from the mark being a literal symbol, such as a scar, a tattoo, or a letter, to a more abstract representation of Cain's exile and punishment. In the end, the true meaning of the Mark of Cain is not found in what it looked like, but in perhaps what it represented. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.